Officially welcome everyone. Today we have Charlie again with us to discuss about getting on the shelves and marketing materials for CPG brands. Welcome again, Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
You and let me know when you're ready for me to start screen sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome to start screen sharing as I get started. It's good to see you guys again. And today the focus is going to be talking about sort of how to prepare to get on the shelf and approach wholesale buyers, and make sure that you are ready, you know what to expect, and that you eventually start moving stuff off the shelf, which is the step after getting on the shelf, right? So Maybelline, if you can share your screen and jump right in, you can skip down to slide 3 or 4, actually.
Okay, let me try to make it so you guys can see the whole. Can everyone see it?
I can see it. Everybody, awesome. I see some nodding. Great. Okay, so I like to think about getting on the shelf like getting a job, right? You can't just like submit a bunch of resumes and hope that somebody like gets back to you. You need to do your research. You need to have a plan. You need to like practice your interview questions. And in this case, it's mastering your pitch. You need to show up prepared, and then you need to follow up. And I think oftentimes the follow-up is actually one of the hardest parts for all of us. So despite our good intentions. Okay, first thing we're gonna do, doing your research, having a plan. So this is relatively straightforward, but the goal, and you can go to the next slide, Maybelline. The goal here is really to, now, if everybody could just sort of raise their hands, if you're selling in any wholesale accounts right now, let me know how many. Feel free to put it in the chat. Let me bring up the chat. Okay, Lola saying 5, 2, and let me just clarify what I mean by wholesale. So wholesale, I mean anything other than your website, your farmer's market, or like Amazon. So wholesale could be an online retailer that's not your website, because ultimately, at the end of the day, when I think of wholesale, I think about some other store, whether that's a physical or digital store, where you need to convince a buyer to carry your products, and for them to sell them sort of for you, if you will. So if you're not in any stores, then first step is just sort of like make a list of your dream accounts initially. Maybe not your like big dream accounts, but the local realistic dream accounts that you would want to get into. If you're in a couple of accounts already, I recommend just keeping track of data in terms of how you're doing in those accounts. How much are they reordering? Which flavors are they reordering? What types of accounts are they? Are they cafes? Are they grocery stores? Are they distilleries? Are they something else? Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is double down on the accounts where you're doing the best, right? And then we need to figure out, once we have our list of stores, we want to figure out who the buyer is, right? And let's say for me, for example, when we launched Element Shrub, I found that we had a lot of success selling to local distilleries, and that our success in distilleries was almost 10x the success we had in grocery stores. So it didn't make sense for me to reach out to 10 grocery stores. It made sense for me to reach out to one distillery where I could do the same amount of business, right? So that's what I mean as we think about like tracking our data to figure out how we're doing in each store, in each category, so that we can double down on the category that makes the most sense. Figuring out who the buyer is. Now, this can be easy in some situations. It can be harder in other situations. And a couple of ways that you can do this are you can show up at the store in person, not to pitch your product, but just to introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm Charlie. I would love to meet I'd love to get the buyer's contact information for, this category, whether it's dairy or grocery or something else. And then follow up with them then. One thing you don't want to do is just show up to a store and expect to pitch your products right on the spot, right? We need to remember that buyers have a lot to do, right? And if it's kind of like somebody knocking on your door in the middle of the day, pitching you something, and you were in the middle of a call, or you were doing something else, and they haven't scheduled time to do that, and so it can be really frustrating. It doesn't leave the best first impression for the buyer, right? So you can do that. Sometimes you can maybe get their contact information through LinkedIn, sometimes through social media. You can call the store and say, hey, I'm just looking for the buyer's information for this category. We'd love to, present to them, but I don't have their information. And start there, right? So once you have your list, once you know who you need to contact, then you need to figure out what your pitch is going to look like, right? And usually you want to create a pitch in both sort of an email pitch and then a phone pitch. Okay, let's keep going, Maybelline. And this is what I hear brands, like one of the biggest mistakes I see brands make when they're pitching buyers. They spend too much time talking about why their product's delicious, or spending 5 minutes on a phone call talking about their brand story, right? Because at the end of the day, if I make cookies, right, but Jody also makes cookies, Jody's going to go into a store and say, hey, I think my cookies are the most delicious ever. And I'm going to say, I think my cookies are the most delicious ever, right? And so buyers are pretty immune to this, it's the most delicious thing ever, or pretty skeptical, because every brand feels that way about their product, right? And so it doesn't really differentiate you by just saying it. And you could have them taste your cookie, but they haven't tasted every other cookie out there. And so they're not going to be able to compare it. It's not a side-by-side, et cetera, et cetera. So the key to your pitch, and the way that I like to think about this, is there is consumer-facing messaging and there is buyer-facing messaging. The consumer-facing messaging, talk about your story, talk about how delicious it is. Show everything that makes it really appealing. For the buyer, you need to think about, why is the buyer going to spend time and energy to bring in your product? What's in it for them, right? And the example I like to use here is, imagine a buyer has a meeting with their boss, right? And Jody, if you don't mind, I'm just going to use you as an example. The buyer says, or the boss is like, okay, how are things going? And the boss is like, hey, oh my gosh, I just brought in these cookies. They are amazing. Like you're going to love this story. They blah, 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 blah. And the boss is like, oh, well, how are they selling? And the buyer is like, oh, well, actually, we haven't sold any yet. And the boss is going to be like, okay, so why did we bring them in? What are you doing? The goal here is that our store needs to make money. It's not to bring in products that have great stories that aren't going to sell, right? And this is not anything about your brand, Jody. So just don't don't take it personally. The point is, your pitch needs to communicate why your product is going to sell, and saying that it's the most delicious ever is not that thing. How does that resonate with you guys so far? And any questions so far on the pitch? And
for me, it makes perfect sense. So are you suggesting that if we should get a buyer by phone, that we should be able to sell this like a 90-second pitch?
yeah, exactly. So your phone pitch is going to be, let's assume the buyer has no more than 2 minutes, right? So it's like, okay, what you got and why is this going to sell, right? And so we'll get into that in a little bit more. Let's keep going, Maybelline, here, and talk about some of the different components to a pitch that we can start to think about. Actually, let's keep going. So one of the exercises you can do it's really helpful to, I guess, set you up for success, or set you up to be able to answer questions that the buyer has. And at the beginning, when you're first trying this, you might not have all the answers, but you should pay attention to, how the buyer responds to your pitch, like why they say no. And part of this whole process is you want to make it as easy as possible for the buyer to say yes, right? So how can you lower the barrier, both from a financial perspective, from a risk perspective, from a shelf life perspective, from a future sort of support perspective, from a trust perspective, to make sure that the buyer is comfortable bringing in your product. And like one example that I've seen some brands do a couple times that, makes sense in theory, but in reality is sort of like a baseline thing that you need to have done anyway. And they'll say something like, our products are, certified in a commercial kitchen or something like that, right? Well, I hope that if you're selling your product to a grocery store, that they're certified in a commercial kitchen, and that's sort of like baseline for everybody. So it's not really a selling point, because the hope is that everybody is also like at that stage. Jody, did you have a question? You're welcome, then. I think you're muted still, sorry.
Yes, I am, sorry. I guess it could go back to or future in the conversation, but how short should an intro email be? If a voice, if you're speaking on the phone, you said less than 2 minutes, like, is it like one paragraph? Is it like 3 sentences? Like, hey, here I am.
So this is actually a good segue. One of the aspects of your email pitch is the email itself. One of the aspects of your email pitch is your email signature. One of the aspects of the email pitch is your sell sheet and your price list. Now, the sell sheet and the price list are more of these like marketing materials that we talk about, and a lot of the sort of basic information about your product. So how big are the cookies? How big is the container that they are going to be sold in? How many units do they have to buy at a time? What's their shelf life? These are all of the like logistical type of questions that the buyer might have about your product that you can anticipate now and then answer on a sell sheet. That information can stay on the sell sheet. It doesn't need to be sort of built into your email pitch. The purpose of the email pitch is to remind them want to get their attention, right? So the subject line is also really important, right? Because if it's not a compelling subject line, they're not going to open it. It's to talk about why bringing in your product will improve sales in that category. At the end of the day, like that is the goal. So then if we break down the email, it's basically like intro, here's why my brand, here's who I am, like, and tell your story, but only as it's relevant to validating either yourself or your brand. Like people need to know that like, I used to be a consultant and I did this, and then I like had an allergy and made this. Like they don't need to know any of that, right? They just need to know that, let's say, you know, I don't know, let's say, for example, let's say I'm a doctor and I created this line of bars and they're supposed to be more nutritionally dense than everything else out there on the market. Well, maybe me being a doctor, like, helps validate the fact that these bars are more nutritionally dense because they were created by a doctor as opposed to somebody else, right? So there's some validation there in that sort of connection to the story and the brand than there is in like, oh, I used to like work for this company, or like whatever the background story is that it might be fun to tell consumers at like the market, but is not like what the buyer needs to hear. And then it's bullet points, say 3 bullet points about why this is going to sell. And that could be category data about the cookie market in general. It could be even more specific category data about a particular aspect of the cookie, whether that's the gluten-free, like, and I'm not talking about you specifically, but it could be the gluten-free market if it's a gluten-free cookie. It could be indulgence if it's like an indulgent cookie. It could be whatever. It could be that, you know, in general, like people are eating dessert more or whatever it is, right? So, and this is like, category data is fairly easy to find on Google. You can also get a lot of good category data from sort of these like post-trade show roundups that people do. So, you know, Expo West happened about a month ago, right? And right after Expo West, there were all these different publications that came out with like top 10 trends in food this year, or, you know, whatever, top 10 products that we're seeing, blah, blah, blah. So those are good indications to a buyer that, hey, we're in this trend. So like, according to, you know, the New York Times, you know, decorated cookies are going to be a thing this year, right? Or now I'm making that up, but like if they said something like, we need to dig through these things and like figure these things out. But those are the types of selling things. Or you say, hey, for example, let's say this store is, let's say you're trying to convince Erewhon to bring you in, and you're like, hey, we sell our product online and we're not in any stores right now, but I've looked at our online data. We have a 50% repurchase rate, and I've looked at the zip codes of where everybody lives, and they all live within a 5-mile like radius of Erewhon. So I know that our customers live near your store. They're already purchasing from us, and they're already asking to buy us somewhere else. So that sort of data, right? Because basically the buyer needs to know that people are going to show up and buy your product, and you need to show them that you already have an audience somewhere that is willing to do that, because at the end of the day, it's your job to get people to buy the product off the shelf. It's not the buyer's job. It's not, what you don't want to do is like put your product on, talk to the buyer and say, hey, what do you think we should do to promote this product? Right? That's not the buyer's job. The buyer's job is to find new products, to put them on the shelf, to manage inventory, to manage their staff, to deal with merchandising, to do all these other things. It's not to be a brand consultant to you to advise on how to promote your product, right? You need to come to the table with that information. And again, it all comes down to the buyer making it as easy as possible for the buyer to say yes. And if you become sort of like high maintenance for them in terms of, hey, this person like actually doesn't know what to do, they just want to talk to me about promotions, well, that might slow down the conversation, right? That was a very long-winded answer, Jody. I don't know. I don't know if that was helpful, but I tried to break down there's different sections of the email. And in the end, you always want a call to action, right? You always want you want to say something about what you want to happen next, right? Which is either, hey, I'd love to drop off samples attached as a copy of my sell sheet. Does Friday at 2 p.m. work for you? Right? You don't want to just leave the email and be like, okay, thanks. Hope you get back to me. Right?
I guess that was very helpful. I get how many times, like, if you don't hear from them in 2 weeks, you send another email, hey, coming back to the top of your thing, and then when do you give up?
Good question. So I'll say two things about that. One, don't give up until they say no. Like, don't give up until they actually come back and say no, because you never know why they didn't answer. Number two, download, I don't know if you use Google for your email, I actually think this might work for multiple emails, but mailtrack.io is a mail tracker that basically shows the buyer or shows anybody that you have seen that they've opened the email. And then that way there's a little more pressure on them to either respond in some way, whether that's yes or no. So that's the other thing. Tracking, you want to track their information. I'm totally blanking now on the last thing I was going to say. Sorry. Maybe it'll come back to me. Okay, let's keep going. I think it'll come back to me, but great. Thank you, Jody. Okay, so next slide, Maybelline, if you don't mind. Okay, so we talked about some of these things before, but again, these are the questions you want to ask yourself, right? What makes you and your product different? What are your values personally and as a company? How do these align with the store and with the target customer of the store? Are you bringing any sort of excitement to the store from a new category or from a seasonal perspective? What data do you already have to demonstrate that your product's going to sell? So again, if you're new, it doesn't mean necessarily data from another grocery store, but like, let's get creative and think about, okay, whether that's farmers market sales, whether that's direct to consumer sales. And then if you don't have any sales at all, then it's kind of like, you're pitching to investors at the beginning and you're saying, hey, here's the market size of this thing. Here's all this market data. Here's why my business is going to be successful. Of course, at the beginning, who knows, but we need to provide some sort of data to sort of prove that, hey, there's at least an opportunity here, right? And then ultimately, right, does the buyer trust you? Are you following up? When you say you're going to send samples, do you send them? When you say you're going to show up, do you show up? When you say you're going to attach your sell sheet, do you? And I know these are like silly little things, but you have to remember that the buyer is getting 100 emails a day from brands trying to pitch them their account. And just like as going back to sort of my original thesis that, getting on the shelf is like getting a job, right? Like if you don't write a cover letter and that was one of the requirements, sorry, like you're out, right? So these little things, paying attention to the details, are going to get the buyer to trust you. And the buyer is really going to trust you once you get that first reorder from them, because that means that they've taken a risk, you've proved them wrong, and now they can reorder and the product is going to move, right? You need to have confidence about how you're going to price your product. And I know sometimes when you're switching from primarily farmers market to wholesale, you need to make sure you understand the wholesale pricing, those sort of the 3-tiered pricing. For now, the 2-tier pricing, which is basically wholesale and retail, the 3-tier being distribution, then wholesale, then retail. But at the end of the day, and we talked about this a little bit last time, most grocery stores are going to want a 40% margin on your price. So if you sell it to them for 6, they're going to sell it for 10. And then you also want to have some basics, depending on how big or how well known the store is, making sure as you're shifting from farmers market, where the sort of rules and regs about like labeling are a little less sort of stringent, that you have all of the things that the retailer wants, whether those are required for your business or not, like a nutrition facts code or a barcode. Because at the end of the day, there is, I think, some rule that you don't need a nutrition facts or something until your X number of sales. But if Whole Foods wants that on every product, then that's going to supersede, that anyway. So there's no reason to like fight them for it, or fight them or like tell them that, oh, well, we're a small business, so we don't count. Sorry. Our policy is that like everybody has this. So, and then also just understanding where they would put it in the store, right? So is there any confusion about merchandising? Is there, is it going to go, Mercedes, for example, like, are your sauces going to go next to mustard and ketchup, or are your sauces going to go next to hot sauce, or are your sauces going to go in another section of the store that I'm not thinking about right now, right? And ideally, I think for most products, it's pretty obvious where your product is going to go. But depending on sort of how sales go, or depending on whether you're able to A/B test in a couple stores, you might find that, for example, we're seeing a lot of sometimes ready-to-drink products in the produce section, and then also in the ready-to-drink section. So if you have data that you can share with the buyer on how you're doing in different stores, in different places, you should share that with them so that they can improve their margin more by selling more product. Jody, question, how do you educate if it's not straightforward? Can you be more specific?
Meaning like you were just speaking of, oh, this is a wellness drink, or this is a cookie, or this is that's speaking for my own brand, that's always the gray area because I'm different.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, it's hard when you have sort of, I would say it's sort of a weird category that overlaps, right? In a way, our shrubs are similar, and we're definitely like really hard to place 6 years ago. I remember we used to sell our products at Mom's Organic Market in the DMV area, and we had a shrub bottle that was $17.99 that they brought in, which is fine, sort of on its own, 25 servings, it's a concentrate. They put it in the water section because you mix it with water, or sparkling water. But then when you go to the water section, you're like, water, $2.99, water, $4.99, shrub, $17.99, water, $5.99. And people are like, I'm sorry, what? Like, what is this? And like, why does it belong here? Was this a mistake? Did somebody just like leave this bottle here, like after picking it up somewhere else, right? And so ultimately, part of that education is up to you. Of one, I mean, telling customers, I guess, learning from customers the sort of like in your case how they consume it, right? And so for us, for shrubs, like 70% of our audience doesn't drink, right? So for us now, there's like more of like a non-alcoholic mixer section in stores. That wasn't the case 6 years ago. So it was really hard to like place us, whether we were next to like vinegar or like olive oil. And so for you, the price point also is relevant, right? Because if you go in sort of the like, let's just use Whole Foods as an example, the like health and beauty section, or wellness sort of like section, price point probably more aligns with your product than, let's say, next to like Oreos, right? And so I think it ultimately it comes down to like, well, what other products are your consumers buying that this would like make sense to them? Because like if you're, because your competitor isn't really Oreo, right? And it's not like any other like typical cookie on the market, right? And so for you, I think it's more about like either an independent like end cap sort of thing that is, you know, one of those like cardboard stands where your stuff is stacked on it and you have the sort of option to maybe test it in different places. Maybe it's next to like, maybe it's one of those next to, I don't know, the kombucha set or like the wellness drinks. But I think for you also, it's doing the education on where the price point makes sense for people, right? Because if there's nothing else in the market that's like that, and if the price point is like 4x, 5x, what everything else is in the market in that particular like store, I mean, then maybe it's not the right store for you.
Well, I think like I've seen Corinne's product and I think her product is a different, you know, something very different and it's like educating someone also. So it's finding I'm understanding like finding the alignment of your consumer and going into that space. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, right, Lola, yes. Not all products need to be on shelves. Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, right, everybody has their own target audience, right? And the most important thing you do before you go out and like, I should have said this before, most important thing you do before you go out and make this list is ask your audience where they shop, right? Why would I go sell my product to Walmart if all my audience shops at Whole Foods? And why would I sell my products at Whole Foods if all my audience shops at Walmart, right? It's really hard to change consumer behavior. And so it's better to make it easy for our existing customers to buy it in places where they already shop. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so showing up prepared. Let's keep going, Maybelline. As I said before, don't just like drop by and expect to get the buyer's attention, expect for them to be happy. I will say occasionally this might work, but again, it doesn't leave the best first impression. And the more you can do to build your relationship with them, the more you can do about sort of building trust from the very beginning by respecting their time, the better it will be for you. Mercedes, I see your question in the chat. How do we ask customers where they shop? Okay, this is going to sound strange, but if you sell your products online, well, not strange, but if you sell your products online, create a post-purchase survey that has a question in it that asks them where they shop. If you sell your products at a farmer's market, create a QR code and put it on a little picture frame on your table and have it link to a survey that says, where did you shop? Or like, where do you like to shop? And I will also say, like, get the contact information of all of your customers and occasionally like email them and ask them if you can set up a 15-minute call to like talk to them and learn more about them. Find out what they do on the weekend, find out how they spend a Friday night, find out how they use your product, find out when they use your product, find out how they talk about your product to their friends, find out how they talk about your brand to their friends, right? Your customers have so much data. Oh, and I'll also say, if you sell your products on Amazon, I feel like the default for Amazon is X number of stars, X number of reviews. And that's great, but even more valuable is the actual words that the people who are leaving these reviews used in their reviews. So how, like, again, going back to that, how do they talk about your product? Do they say it's too spicy? Do they say it's too sweet? Do they, one, it gives you an opportunity for all the like 1 and 2 star reviews to fix things about your product that you might never have noticed. Now, not all things need fixing. Sometimes it's just not your audience, but I think you can be the judge of that. And then for the really good reviews, right, it's pulling the data from all the questions that I just asked in your surveys from those and figuring out, do they talk about, oh, this reminds me of my grandmother, or, oh, like this, like I never liked hot sauce until I bought this or something. I don't know. And the downside of Amazon reviews is you can't just like reach out to those people and follow up, but with farmers markets and your website, you can. Okay, but we offer in restaurants. So Mercedes, do you mind clarifying your question here? I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean. You're welcome to unmute.
Yeah, so we manufacture it inside of the restaurant.
Okay.
And customers ask to buy it on the spot. And so this has been going on for maybe about, I would say, let's say 8 months on and off.
Okay.
So I mean, we have a huge following on IG, but everyone hasn't purchased the seasoning, but everyone is tasting that seasoning in their food. They don't know it, but that's what we use.
Great.
So do we just ask them sort of online, hey, you guys who have purchased our seasoning, where would you purchase it at? Would you like to see it in Target? Are we asking what would you like, or where do you actually shop at in terms of placement?
I would say it's better to leave it open-ended right now to ask, where do they shop, and just see what they say. But who do you use for your restaurant POS and reservations? Clover. Is that both for reservations and POS?
So we don't do reservations at all. We take reservations just by phone, but all of our POS services are through Clover.
Clover, got it. Does Clover have a guest email follow-up?
They probably do. I need to look into that. And are you suggesting that maybe we just have people sign up with their email?
I mean, I'm not sure. The privacy thing is the one thing you just need to check on.
Right.
But we use Toast and Talk at the bar in Georgetown, and I think there's a way in Toast that you can, when they sign their check, you can automatically have a box checked that says like, we agree to receive like email,
Oh,
like marketing from this company, and then they have to like uncheck it if they don't want to.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and so I would see if that's an option. And then that
Mm-hmm.
way you can send a follow-up email. And I would actually say, you know, at that point, you should say, hey, hope you loved your food. By the way, we sell these spices. If you want to purchase one from us, you can.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the link to purchase.
Okay.
And
Makes sense.
and then either, I don't know, they can pick it up when they come in, or you could ship it to them depending on what your,
Mm-hmm.
set up, how you're set up from that like fulfillment perspective.
Okay.
But
Good.
that's a super warm audience, right? That is one tasting your
Right.
product already and that knows
Yeah.
you and that loves you. And so the more you can do to learn about not even, I mean, at this point, you don't really need to learn about them, like who they are, but you need to ideally capitalize on letting them know that you have this product for sale.
Sure. Okay.
Right. And offering it to them like immediately. Like, I feel like sometimes restaurants, they have these like automated emails that's like, hey, you haven't like made a reservation in 30 days, like just a reminder kind of thing. Or like, thanks for coming. Please leave us a review on Google. Right. And so I feel like there's got to be some sort of like post-visit
Follow up. Yeah.
email follow-up sort of sequence that you could
Mm-hmm.
set up with Clover, so that one, you set it up once and you don't have to do anything
Mm-hmm.
after that, and then it's just looking at the data. And two, then driving traffic to your website where you set up a spot to do purchasing and then ultimately fulfillment. And so for
Okay.
you at the beginning, it might not even be because you already have an audience. You could certainly, try to sell to local grocery, but you could also just try to
Online.
increase like your direct to consumer sale.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, Maybelline, let's keep going here. Okay, so going back to this idea of, pitching, how to show up, right? Be on time. Think about those answers to questions that they might already have. Think about the data of the category. Make sure you bring your product. And I always like keep product in the back of my car, like if they say yes and they want to buy it right then, but it's not always expected. Sometimes, depending on your product, like let's say you have a baking mix or something, sometimes it's hard to like, obviously they're not going to just taste the baking mix straight. So you're going to want to bring cookies that you've already made that are made with your baking mix or something, something like that. You just want to also be mindful of, in that case, allergies the buyer might have, because, at the end of the day, the buyer doesn't have to like your product. They just have to be convinced that it's going to sell. And I know that sounds crazy, but if they get to keep their job, if your product sells, right? And who knows, like maybe they don't drink coffee, but they know that coffee sells. And so they're going to bring on a bunch of coffee SKUs, right? Okay, so those are all the things you should do. Here are some things you should not do. So pitching, you can go to the next slide, Avery, sorry. Pitching in Q4, so especially for grocery, it's an incredibly busy time of year for them when they're dealing with all of the different holiday things, going from, pumpkin spice to Thanksgiving to Christmas to New Year's and all of the like seasonal products that come with those holidays. But it's not a great time to pitch for the first time. Now, if you have a product that falls into one of those categories, you want to make sure you're on the shelf before Q4 so that you can take advantage of it. Like, don't pitch them on a holiday weekend. Like, I know this may seem obvious, but like 4th of July, Memorial, like don't pitch on one of those weekends because it's just gonna like, they're gonna be busy doing other things, right? And then ideally don't pitch like first thing in the morning. Usually buyers are accepting orders from distributors and getting stuff on the shelf. So like late morning, early afternoon, probably a better option. All right, let's keep going. So following up, Jody, I remembered what I was going to say. You said how many, well, were you asking how many times to follow up before, which I did answer, and I said basically keep doing it until they say no. But the important thing to remember is because buyers are getting so many emails from so many brands, you need to continue to follow up, and you need to stay relevant to them and not make the assumption that just because they like didn't respond to your email means they don't like you or they didn't forget you or they like think your product sucks. It just means they're getting a lot of emails. And so there is some like data point out there that says you usually have to follow up 7 times before you can actually like close the deal, which is kind of crazy, but it also means thinking about other ways to reach out to the buyer to build a relationship with them and not just say, hey, do you want to buy my product? Hey, do you want to buy my product? Hey, do you want to buy my product? Right? Like share new news about the business. Hey, we just launched this new SKU. Hey, I saw it was your birthday on Facebook or whatever. I just wanted to send you a cookie or something. Or like, hey, we just got this mentioned in this newspaper, whatever, this press. We just won this award. Like, there's all these things that you can share with the buyer to stay relevant and top of mind to them. And it doesn't have to just be, hey, just wanted to remind you that I sent samples. Are you ready to buy? Right? Because nobody wants that, right?
You're basically saying because I sent samples to a local restaurant that we spoke about doing something together. We spoke, I sent samples, I followed up. She said, oh, I'm going to check the mail. And I never heard back. It's like a bad date. I don't know, when to like, but I know she is quite busy. I know what's going on in her world adjacently, I guess. So it's like, how do you inch your way back in? Like, hey, did you get like without being that person?
Yeah. So, Mercedes, I would love your take on this, but speaking from experience at our bar, the timing of your emails for people that work in restaurants is going to be critical because, I would imagine if it's like a dinner restaurant and you send them an email between 4 and 11 p.m., like, no.
But
Yes.
Mercedes, restaurant people don't sleep, right? Like you're I know that I'm constant for my own reasons, but it's like, where do you find that sweet spot, right?
So I will say this, and it's relevant to what we're talking about, but it's also / catering. So we get a lot of catering from time to time, and I typically will ask my customers, why did you select Caribbean Soul Kitchen LA? And it's almost 98% that the customer did not get a response from other people in the industry. They did not respond to the request for catering. And so I am diligent. And when I say diligent with emails, responding, opening them, whatever I have to do now with regards to just sending these emails, you know, just like there's a calendar for everything else, I just think we calendar it. Now, I was pondering what is the best time, because I know there are some executives, speaking of buyers, that will probably, unless if they don't have a life, this is if they don't have a life and their business is their life. Some of them will open these emails at the late evening time, right? Because once their day is started, between 8 and 9 a.m., they're going, you know. So it just really depends. But I feel like I might send an email probably at 7 a.m. That's going to be me, so that I can get it out of my hands, and then, you know, give it 3 days to see if there's a response. But I was really stumped when you suggested that we never give up, you know, just keep going and pursuing, because there may come a time where someone will respond. So I thought that was good.
I read an email at 3:30 in the morning yesterday, or this morning. So I get what
Yeah.
you're saying, Mercedes. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and it sounds like, you know, I mean, Mercedes is doing everything she should be doing, but it sounds like there's a lot of restaurants that aren't, right? And so, you know, for
Yeah.
you, Jody, right, like not hearing from this restaurant doesn't really seem like a surprise to me, right? And so I think like restaurants are great because it's for sort of like CPG products, because they give you great recurring revenue without a lot of marketing spend, right? Because it's an ingredient on the menu, or it's you know, it's not necessarily, you don't have to show up and do a demo to push your product there, right? And so I think the life cycle for getting into a bar or a restaurant might be a little bit longer at the beginning, but it's going to have more of an impact long term if you can build a good relationship with them and keep that as like a consistent menu item for them. Yeah. And also the pitch, I'll say the pitch with restaurants is, and again, Mercedes would love your thoughts here, or I guess confirmation, is less about like, you know, that your product's going to sell. It's more about, you know, is this going to cut my costs? Is this going to be more efficient for my staff? Is this going to make my menu like sexier or more interesting? Is this going to, is from a like logistical storage perspective, is this the perfect size, right? Do I have room for this? What's the shelf life? How frequently do you deliver? And because this is an item in my like best-selling dish. If I don't have it, like I'm screwed. So I need to make sure, like from a trust perspective, that you're showing up every Monday morning and like dropping off what I need.
Oh gosh. Well, I definitely have some feedback for this category. Currently, Caribbean Soul Kitchen does not offer dessert, which is really a no-no in the restaurant industry. You should absolutely have something sweet for your customers to tie their dinner or lunch up. And so when we first opened, we gave out these amazing samples of banana pudding. Well, that banana pudding was made by my aunt, and it is a family like recipe. Everyone loved it, but I could not carry this in the restaurant for a multitude of reasons, which you just pointed out. My aunt was extremely unreliable. You know, she's a very fickle individual. So for us to consider using her was not going to make business sense, financial sense, or even to take a risk on. Third, it was about the shelf space. The shelf space for us is everything, because we have limited shelf space. We have been approached by several businesses with desserts, amazing products, but we don't have the space to house them. I even had someone suggest that they would get refrigeration for it, but it's, you know, most restaurants have already geographically placed their appliances. within their establishment. And you cannot add anything more because it's already taking up space. So our issue is not so much that we don't want the dessert options, but it's where is it going to sit, placement, how long is it going to last? We have to think, you know, we're not open on Mondays. So we are a Tuesday through Saturday operation. Like, everything has to be taken into consideration with how you move your product, how you manage your product, you know, shelf life, especially with dessert. You know, cookies is one of those things that can last a lot longer than, let's say, a cake. I give a cake 5 days and that's it. It's got to go. I just, you know, and if it's not moving, it's sort of like the banana pudding idea or concept we had. You have to consume that in 2 days. So to buy a whole tray of banana pudding sitting close to $100, if we don't serve that, it's a complete loss for us. It's a loss. So I definitely think when you want to put items into a restaurant, ask if you can do a walkthrough. Unless you are placing this product on, they have cabinet space for it and they just know that it's going to be away from operational appliances and things like that.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. All right. So we talked briefly about the sort of marketing material before. I touched on it, your shelf talker, your sell sheet, and your price list. I'd love to just kind of go into detail about each of those a little bit more. Shelf talker is basically that little business card size or like index card size thing that you'll see literally like on the shelf next to your product of like local product found here. It's either like sticking out, you know, perpendicular to the shelf or it's like right below it. And the goal with that is one, to just bring more attention to your product on the shelf. And the goal is to highlight some things that about the product that are going to get consumers to be like, yep, this is what I've been looking for, right? And so when we think about like, you know, farmers market versus grocery, it's relatively easy to sell something at a farmer's market compared to a grocery store because you can be there in person, you can tell your story, they connect with that human, like they're engaged most of the time, and in general, the willingness to spend in a farmer's market is usually a little bit higher than grocery. But in grocery, it's just your packaging and that's it, right? And so you can't tell your story. You can't be there to see how they're reacting and, you know, tweak your pitch, right? And so that shelf talker is going to be critical if the retailer is willing to put it on there to just help give a little more information about, you know, who you are, why you should buy it, what the product is, why you should buy it, things like that. Sell sheet is going to be 2 pages. Front page is going to be ideally a brand photo that includes your product image with some sort of way your product's being used. So for example, if you make spices, it's not just a picture of the spice jar, but also the food that you can make with it. Talking about your accolades, talking about your press mentions, talking about just sort of a tagline, who you are as a brand, to sort of get that buyer to almost just get their mouth watering and excited about like buying this brand and trusting it. Page 2 is going to be all of the specs. So product image, barcode, highlight. You don't have to do nutrition facts as like the actual nutrition fact label. You can just highlight the aspects of your product from your nutrition facts that customers care about. So whether that's calories, sugar, fat, whatever it is. And oh, thanks, Maybelline. And then that way, you're only focusing on the things that are really important. And then you'll also have the specs. So here, right, the product name, the barcode, the unit size, the unit dimensions, and this is so, you know, the buyers know whether it will literally like fit on the shelf or not, or which shelf it will fit on. Minimum order quantity, a call to action to place an order. Right, you don't just want people, again, it's not like the email where you're like, okay, thanks for listening, have a great day, right? The goal is like, the goal of the sell sheet is you want them to place an order, right? So let's just spell that out for them and make it really obvious. And then of course, when it comes to designing it, you don't want to overthink the design. You want, use your brand colors, use your brand font. Use your website as inspiration, and yeah, and go from there. I'll also say Canva is like what I use for all of my design stuff recently. It's like the Apple version of like Adobe Illustrator. It's like super easy to use. It's not as like creative and complex, but super easy to use. So if you need ideas on how to do this quickly, Canva is a great option. So that's your sell sheet. The one thing you don't put on your sell sheet is pricing, because in some cases you don't necessarily want to share your pricing with everybody, and your pricing is going to change, and it's also going to change depending on who you're selling it to, right? So if you're selling to a restaurant, you might have like a food service price. If you're selling to a grocery store, you might have your typical wholesale price. And if you're selling to a distributor, you might have your distributor price. So it's better to just leave your pricing off your sell sheet and then create a price list for each channel that you're selling into so that you can send the right price to the right person. Any questions about sort of the marketing material? Okay. Let's talk about, actually, next slide, Maybelline, if you don't mind. Okay, yeah, so the things that not include on your spelling, or on your spelling, on your sell sheet. Pricing, as I said, ideally, you don't want to have long paragraphs or text, right? You just want to have like icons. You want to have short like descriptions of, you know, who you are as a brand, pictures. Good photography is always better if possible. And I always like a human element as well, right? Whether that's a picture of the founder, whether that's just like hands touching the product or something to like bring a little more warmth to it. And again, it depends on your brand, but I do think that just brings a little more warmth to it. Obviously, you want to make sure you don't have spelling mistakes. You want to make sure everything is aligned. Like you don't want things to be like, it's just not necessary, and like just creates a little more distraction for the buyer. So, okay, let's keep going. Maybelline, don't mind. Okay, we also talked about just making sure you're ready, you're confident about your pricing for stores. And so just want to talk about the difference between margin and markup. Margin is what most I would say what all retailers use. So when they say 40% margin, it's the profit divided by the revenue. So as I said, if you sell it to them for 6, they're going to sell it for 10. If you think that they're talking about markup, but they say margin, you can see the difference is actually a 40% markup on $6 is $8.40. So you just want to make sure you are clear on those sort of calculations so you know what to expect. And yeah, as I said, 35 to 40% margin, although I'd say some stores are creeping up to like 45 or 50 depending on the store. So groceries typically 35 to 40, but the smaller independent stores might be a little bit higher. The gift type stores are going to be closer to 50%. Online retailers are going to be 50 usually. Food service is different. Yeah. Any questions about sort of pricing? Okay. All right, let's keep going. So one other question I get from buyers a lot is, when you're going to start working with a wholesale account, and this is, at this point, the buyer has said yes, and they said, okay, we want 4 cases of product, right? So you either need to say, this is our price plus shipping, which is FOB pricing, freight on board, or this is our price including shipping, which is delivered pricing. At the end of the day, the buyer, you want to make sure that your FOB price plus shipping plus 40% still gets you to $10. So if, we use that $6 to $10 example. If your FOB, now this example shows $6 plus $12 for shipping, right? Gets you to a total of $84, or you charge $7 and you include shipping and it's the same price. So at the end of the day, right, it's the same price to the buyer. It's up to you as a brand whether you want to take on the risk of shipping prices going up over time, right? Which inevitably happens, right? And so, but the buyer wants to pay the same amount every time, right? Can you imagine Mercedes having to pay a different price for whatever dessert it is every time you have to buy it? That would, and then having to change your menu prices accordingly to meet your margins, that would be not fun, I imagine. But it's important to be confident about knowing the difference between these two and sharing that with the buyer, so that they know what to expect as well. Any questions about FOB versus delivered? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so then on your price list, so we talked about shelf tuckers, we talked about sell sheets, and now we talk about price lists, right? So you can just use sort of the second page of your sell sheet and just add pricing. That's the sort of the easiest way to do it. And also your wholesale price, I said you might have different pricing, but you're going to have the same pricing when you work with an account, like a retailer directly, and you're going to have the same pricing whether you work with any restaurant. So any restaurant has the same pricing, any food service account has the same pricing, any retailer has the same wholesale pricing, and every distributor has the same distributor pricing. Those 3 prices might be different, and that's okay, but you don't want to sell to one store for $5 and sell the store down the street for $6, because then it's just, 1, not fair, and 2, yeah. And with distributors, if you sell at different prices, there's usually something in their contract that says, if you sell it to somebody else for less than this, you have to, sell it to us for that same price. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we need to get into distributor pricing, to be honest, yet, unless anybody wants to talk about it. But any questions so far on the pitch, on getting ready for the pitch, on delivering the pitch, on email, phone, marketing materials? Jody? Or I don't know if you had a question.
Yeah, I do. I was just reading what Mercedes wrote in the thing. So I guess my question is, what happens, or do you have any wisdom on, so you you have your packaged goods, you're ready to go, and what does it look like where, like, my co-packer that I'm potentially going to work with, they don't distribute it, then I have to take the product and I distribute it myself? Like, from your knowledge of what you've done in the past, like, did you bring it home and then distribute it that way? Like, how did that look like the facade of what it looked like?
To retailers, yes, I did that. For I think at some point though, like from a just volume perspective, right? You just need to figure out like at what point do you need a third party to either ship your direct to consumer orders for you and or deliver your wholesale orders for you. Remind me of your shelf life.
I'm working on that right now.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
that's like that's the limbo I'm in.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. That's going to be the hardest part with fulfillment.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I would imagine like you'd need a refrigerated fulfillment or frozen fulfillment place and then they'd pull it or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'm looking at all the options right now.
Yeah. Got it. Got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. Anybody else? Corin, Mercedes, Lola, Dolores?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
We are currently in 2 very local grocery stores, like within 10 minutes from our house. So we deliver them without any delivery fee. We are currently looking into and have had meetings with 2 different science centers. The big one in downtown LA, and we are in the west end of the San Fernando Valley. So with traffic, it can take up to an hour and a half to get there. But we do prefer to deliver because some of our products are very fragile. So I don't love to ship them just because I can't guarantee the quality once it arrives. Is it okay to not charge the local grocery stores a delivery fee, but some of these other places that are expanding outside of our area, charge them some sort of delivery fee? Or because I'm not willing to ship, should I just kind of eat that cost of delivering?
No, 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 and no again. I'm sorry, Charlie. Is it okay if I respond?
No, that's what I was going to say. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, Corinne, an absolute no-no in your industry is to never not apply a fee.
Okay.
And even if you say for that particular grocer, you want to show them some favor or love, if you will. You know, they took a chance on you, so okay. But just operationally in business, if it's taking you an hour to get it to them, that is gas. And
right.
Gas is not cheap. So I would at least say, okay, it's no problem for us to bring it to you because of its fragility, whatever. But we have to change that program, right? So because my delivery rate on all catering orders, within, let's say 8 to 12 miles is $120.
Ooh. Okay.
And that's expensive. It's expensive, but it also gives my customer the option to say, we'll pick it up. We will pick this catering up, right? Because they just don't have maybe that extra $120. Or they say, you know what, forget it. It's food. I don't want to deal with, moving it. The $120 is worth it for me. But as a business, you're eating so much of the cost already. Right. It makes no sense to not, to not. I mean, and it almost yells, I'm not worthy, right?
Right.
As a
Right,
business,
okay.
your business is producing something. Your business is an actual business. You're being taxed. All of these things are happening, and you'll be able to write off that mileage. So I don't know if you're doing that within your business, but the gasoline alone is a bill. So I would
Right.
say, let's just say in the third quarter, I think that's September, October, no, that's July, right? So the third quarter, you'll just let your current customers know, hey guys, inflation is happening. We're going to start charging a small fee, for the delivery practices. We know that this may come as, just frame it in the way, and I guarantee you they're going to understand. There is no business besides you that is not charging for some kind of delivery fee.
Right. I think both of these science museums are nonprofit organizations. So I just wasn't quite sure how to approach, that we don't.
But nonprofits have a ton of money
to deliver, but you have to pay for it. You know what I mean?
But they have a lot of money, Corinne. Trust me. I know they're nonprofit. That's how they filed. And they're re-gifting money to all kinds of businesses. Nonprofits have to dump a lot of money. So it's not a crime for you to get at least that part of it, right? That's what I would say.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. I agree. I will also add that, yes, it is both gas, but also your time. I mean, can you imagine, even for Mercedes, let's say Mercedes wasn't the one that was actually making, or was the one that was making these deliveries, and somebody wanted food delivered at 5 o'clock and she had to drive an hour to go deliver it to them. Well, what's the opportunity cost for her to do that on a day when she would otherwise have to be running the restaurant, right? And the opportunity cost for you is, well, what if you could spend 3 hours writing sales emails to people, right? Or what if you could spend 3 hours doing something else, right? So it's not just the cost of the gas, but it's also the cost of your time. Or the way that I like to think about it is the cost of the time that you would have to pay somebody to do it if you go on vacation, right?
Right.
So you have to hire somebody to go do it for you. Well, let's say right now it's free for you because you're doing it, but let's say you have to pay somebody $25 an hour to go do that. Well, that's $75, right? And if the cost of your order is $100, right? You just lost basically all of your profit and more, right?
Right.
And so I think, you really it feels at the beginning hey, we just have to say yes to everything. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to say no to everything when you don't have a business. And that's the really hard part to hear. Now I do, we live in Arlington, Virginia, and DC is maybe 4 miles away. I ship product to DC. And it costs me, I could, if I'm delivering something to Georgetown, I can probably be there and back in 45 minutes, but I can also ship it to Georgetown for $12. And, I hope that I'm worth more than $12 an hour, right? Or that my time is worth more than that, right? And so even if I'm not hiring somebody to do that, the cost is now UPS $12, right? And so what I would do is actually start to do some research on either, okay, what's the true cost going to be for you to deliver it? Or what's the true cost going to be for you to hire somebody to deliver it? Or maybe there is some shipping solution that does work for you. We just haven't figured it out yet, right? Maybe it's putting a pillow, I don't know, in your box to really help soften, or some sort of other like, and you can always just like take product and like ship it to your friends and like have them give you feedback on like what it looked like, or ship it to yourself, ship it back to yourself, right?
Right.
And see what happens. And so I think you can test those different things and see how, see what happens. And then feel confident that either we are going to ship and this is how much we're going to ship, and we're going to add like, you know, $5 for all these extra like packaging costs to the actual cost of shipping, and that's going to be our shipping cost, or you deliver and you add shipping to that, or, you know, and this might not make sense, but you basically bake the cost of delivery into your price, which is basically your delivered price, right? So you give them one number and it's like, hey, but the hard part there is then if there's like negotiation and you have to negotiate down, you're basically cutting out of your shipping margin. So it's usually easier from a like price negotiation to like separate out shipping so that you know like you have that covered. And then from a pricing perspective, you have more margin between your cost of goods sold and your like listed price to negotiate that component. But shipping stays the same.
Okay, so should I charge a different delivery fee based on where they are? Like one science center is 20 minutes from me, no traffic, easy to get to. The other science center being in downtown could be anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours in LA traffic. So
I charge shipping basically, I charge the cost of shipping that it takes to get wherever it's going, right?
Okay.
And so for me, we're in Virginia, you know, we just shipped some product to a restaurant in Miami. They paid $20. If I'm shipping to DC, they pay $12. You know, if I'm shipping to LA, they pay $25, $30.
Okay. Okay. And should that be included in your like pitch deck, or is that a conversation once you have kind of
I think you can
reeled
just
them in
say
and you're able to
FOB
have that?
pricing. No, you just say my pricing does not include shipping.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You as well, Mercedes. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes. That was awesome. All right. And anybody else? Maybe like, I know we're getting close, so I want to make sure you have enough time to like make some announcements if you need to. So feel free to cut me off whenever you want, but I always just want to help. So
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question, Jody, and then we'll let you go, Charlotte.
great.
Just a really quick question. Charlie, if we wanted to like sidebar with you and talk to you more about this kind of stuff, LinkedIn, email, what's the best way, and consulting?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe talk to me, like, I don't know, Maybelline, how do you guys handle that? Oh, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Right now, we'll have to see how the program goes. If we have budget for it, we could definitely cover time with you from for the two of you, Jody, or for anyone that needs it. But we have to see how it goes, because Mercedes, not all of those profits have a lot of money. I wish we do, so we can give it away.
Oh, I didn't mean necessarily the project paying for it individually. If you know.
Oh, I see. Sure.
Yeah. Yes, forward thinking.
LinkedIn, connect on me with LinkedIn, and then like
I did already.
Yeah, we'll go from there. Okay. I don't like, I'm not like great about checking my LinkedIn messages, but
either am I, but
I'll get there. Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, of course.
I know, Maybelline, I was joking.
I know, Mercedes. No, but it is true. Like, even if you are dealing currently with a non-profits, you should be selling to your price, because we also make a budget for the things that the actual market price of things. Or, you know, try some sort of way, because as is being said, your time and your product is valuable and people should be paying for it.
Well, and the other thing I'll say is that you said this was, what was the institution that you're selling to? Corinne?
It's the Los Angeles Science Center.
Right. So have you ever been to a science center or museum that has food priced at reasonable prices?
No.
Right.
There you go.
So they need, you can charge this much money, and there is basically price insensitivity at this type of institution, right? And so just like the airport, right? Like they are
Right,
going
their
to
markup
mark
is
up whatever
insane.
whatever their cost is plus that, right? So at the end of the day, it's not like a grocery store situation where you have to compete next to, you know, another product in a similar category, right? Here, there's no competition and there's no price sensitivity. So, you know, go for it. Like, just
Okay.
cover your costs.
Okay,
And
perfect.
more.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else before we let Charlie go? Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you guys for all the questions. It's great to see you. Mercedes, thank you for your input as well, especially. And I hope, wish you guys the best of luck as you expand into this. Yeah, and you can either reach out to Maybelline or find me on LinkedIn if you have other questions and want to keep going. So, and next time I'm in LA, I'm gonna have to come visit you, Mercedes, at the restaurant. So.
Thank you
Sounds
so much,
amazing.
Charlie.
All right. See you guys.
One.
Have a great day. Have a great week.
Guys, just another minute and then I will also let you go. Let me stop recording.